cocktails. So we're going to try and answer some of the questions. So the origins, actually, it's a relatively new thing in general terms, although we'll talk about some really old stuff in a minute. And where does the name come from? So we've got these various stories. So in literature, as it were, it's talked about relatively recently, if you like, and the word cocktail isn't really used until even more recently than that. So I like this idea that's referred to in Bartender magazine, that British sailors were served an alcoholic drink with fruit in it with a big feather in it, right? And you can just imagine that, some kind of sailor's pub crawl in the West Indies or something, you know. What have you been doing? Oh, we've had a cocktail, you know, that's the kind of thing. I like that story. But we also seem to have this idea of having some alcoholic brew that was given to cocks before cockfighting, just to get them all ready to fight. So, after considerable research, we think we can determine what an ideal mix is meant to be. So if you're playing around with cocktails at home, how do you get the right kind of blend? In the end, it's all about your taste and what you want and what you're trying to achieve. But here's an idea, this idea of 3 parts spirit, 2 parts of sweet, 1.5 parts of sour. Okay, so this is about trying to hit all the flavour spots at the same time. You don't want to have something that's just bitter or just sweet. If you can put the right kind of blend together and have the right kind of spirit level in there, you can get a much nicer product. That's the point. I say be prepared to experiment. But when you look at this, I kind of go, do you know what? That's nearly 50-50. If you look at that, and I go, yeah, it's nearly 50-50. 50% spirit, 50% other stuff, right? And that's how I tend to, you know, just as a rule of thumb, and that's how I tend to make the products. And we're going to try one later on, and I've made it 50-50. And I've tried this, and when I did it with people like the product development guys at Dr. Snapple, I did that. I said to them, okay, 50-50, and they were going, no way. We made the cocktail 50-50 with spirit, and they're going, that's going to be far too strong. When they tasted it, they went, it isn't, it's spot on. So, rule of thumb, 50-50. So, there you go. Try it. But there's good reasons why you might want things to be cold. And you may study this kind of thing here about the retention of flavour. And that's why a lot of people put it on their cans, put it on their bottles, best served chilled. Because they know that that's going to retard the perception of off notes in the product. So you've had a product that's made, it's been shipped around, stored, been on a shelf in a supermarket or something, you're going to take it home, they want you to serve it chilled because it's going to taste nicer. So that is an important thing. I've been working with a couple of guys in London who've opened a new cocktail bar, and they won't use ice at all. They've got this whole thing about not using ice. And when I did the Hendrix thing with them last year, we did a lunchtime session, they actually made one of the cocktails in a microwave, which was quite interesting. So we made a warm cocktail, which kind of surprised a few people because everyone has this idea, it's got to be cold and refreshing. It doesn't. We're back to experimenting again. So try that. And again, if you use some good quality components and some good quality spirit, good quality juice, you may not need to chill it to retard flavour. You might want to leave it at room temperature to let the flavour come out. In speaking to some of the mixologists and people who make cocktails and what have you, they seem to have this rule of thumb about when to shake something or when to stir it. And I've heard a lot of them say that if you're just mixing spirits together, you stir it. So their rule for this type of product would be stir it. Why would you shake it? If you're going to mix in fruit juice and all kinds of other things, you need to give it a shake. You know, products of different density and that kind of thing. So that's their rule of thumb. So does it make any difference? We have done this experiment myself, and there are other people that have done it. And again, if we'd have had the time, maybe we could have tried it out here. And everyone would say they have their preference, but actually, nobody can really tell the difference. Every time we've done this experiment, it is exactly 50-50, you know, in the preference. So there doesn't really seem to be any difference between it at all. So the Bloody Mary is believed to be the most complex of cocktail compositions. And I think this demonstrates, for me, it demonstrates a lot about the kind of properties that you might want to look for, and I think it's quite interesting. So what we've got, and I think most people could probably at least write down the beginning of a Bloody Mary type recipe, and it would probably look something like this. So you've got your tomato, some lime or lemon, you usually have some vodka in there, Worcester sauce, celery, some Tabasco to add a bit more spice, and some black pepper. So this would be very, very typical. Now, what's interesting about this is that, again, if you come back to our idea of a 50-50 mix, you make this 50-50 roughly, let's say, tomato juice and vodka, and then add in your other bits and pieces, you're not far off. I was with, and I haven't included it in this recipe, but I was in a bar in New York at one point, having Bloody Mary, and this bartender trying to convince us he made the best Bloody Marys. We had several, we argued with him, and then but we could see, you know, his was a bit different. And here's his secret ingredient. So we finally, after a while, wheedle this out of him. He adds a dash of sherry at the end. And his whole thing was about smoothing the product out, adding in that extra little complexity of a bit of sherry. And I thought, interesting point. It worked really, really well.